Chapter 12. We left for Washington on the morning of the 6th of September. The truck had come the day before, and we put in a good lot of straw for bedding and a trailer load of grass for food. It was high time we were leaving because the town of Freedom was just about out of grass. We'd used up all the grass for a couple of miles around, I guess. The nights had been cool lately, and Uncle Beasley was kind of sluggish until he got warmed up. The morning we left was gray and misty, and we could barely get the big dinosaur to stand up and follow me to the truck. He was really sizable now. Dr. Zemer's notebook for that day said 10 feet, 6 inches. But it was hard to measure him exactly, his tail was so big. And his weight was 1,140 pounds. We had some big planks resting on the tailgate of the truck for a kind of ramp, but we couldn't get Uncle Beasley to walk up it. He just stood in the back of the truck, wagging his big head slowly back and forth. I stood inside the truck and pulled on his chain, and Dr. Zemer and Pop and the truck driver sort of pushed from behind, but it was no good. He didn't budge. Finally, I had an idea. I went over to Mrs. Parsons' garden and picked a gladiola, and I brought that back to the truck. Then I showed it to Uncle Beasley and held it in front of his nose to smell. That sort of woke him up, I guess, and he lifted up his head and lumbered up the ramp into the truck with an eye on the gladiola. The truck's springs sagged as he got in. As soon as he was all the way in, I gave him the gladiola and slipped out the back of the truck. Then we closed up the tailgate and fastened it. Mom and Pop and Cynthia were standing around to see us off, and Mom was asking if I had my extra pair of pajamas, and Pop was telling me to write some letters home. Dr. Zemer was saying thank you and goodbye to everybody, and the truck driver was reminding us that we better get going if we wanted to get to Washington before Christmas. I put my suitcase in Dr. Zemer's car, and then I climbed into the cab of the truck. I was supposed to see that Uncle Beasley didn't get too excited by all the noise. Just what I was going to do about it, I didn't know, but at least he could see me through the little window and would know that I was going with him. Finally, the truck engine started, and after it was warmed up, we pulled out into the street. I waved out the cab window, and as the truck rolled up the street, I could see Mom and Pop and Cynthia waving from in front of the house. And then pretty soon, I couldn't see them anymore. And then the trees shut out the view, and I couldn't even see the house. It was the first time I'd ever gone off and left the family like that, but I was too excited to think about that very much. It was about 6:30 in the morning when we started, and everything was all misty as we went by Ossipee Lake. When I looked back, I could just make out Dr. Zemer's car coming along behind us. The truck driver's name was Michael Finney, and he told me all the places I ought to go. To see in Washington, like the Washington Monument and the zoo. He'd been working for the National Museum for 20 years, he said, and he'd gone out years ago with an expedition to Wyoming to collect fossils. That was the Como Bluff dinosaur graveyard, he explained. It was just out of Medicine Bow, Wyoming, and surely that's the loneliest, scariest country I've ever laid eyes on. It was the barest, forsakenest kind of place, and all these big old bones coming out of the ground. I can tell you I was glad when that trip was over. If you want my personal opinion, I don't go for all these bones and things like that. Give me a live animal every time and leave all those old bones lie. That's my view of the matter. Later on, the sun came out and the mist burned away, and it was a nice September day as anybody could want. The hayfields along the road looked kind of clean and dry and pleasant, the way they do usually in the fall, and we didn't see hardly any cars on the road at that hour of the morning. The first traffic we came to was down in Manchester. Just as we were coming into the city, a man in a big shiny car tried to go past us, and he blew his horn right beside the truck. That must have startled Uncle Beasley, because I heard him heave around back there and bang his horn against the sides. I looked back through the window and spoke to him, but it was quite a while before he calmed down. He didn't like automobile horns for some reason. And all the rest of the trip, I had to keep soothing him when he heard them blowing too near him. It was an awful long ride. Michael Finney kept calling out the names of the cities as we went through them, so I could see where we were on the map. I could follow our route through Worcester, Massachusetts, and Hartford, Connecticut, and I remember going through New York all right because horns were blowing just about all the time there, and I had to keep talking and talking to Uncle Beasley to keep him from banging around too much. After New York, though, it got kind of confusing, and I couldn't tell where one city left off and the next one began. I never saw such a lot of houses and chimneys and factories and things. It looked as if the whole place was one big city, with gray smoke rising up all over the place and smudging up the sky so you could hardly tell whether it was a clear day or not. It was pretty late in the afternoon when we went past Philadelphia, and then we stopped somewhere and had supper at a place where you could put a nickel in a little box at the table, and some music would start playing somewhere else. Michael Finney showed me how to do it. You could pick out the music you wanted by punching a red button under the title. I picked one called Night on the Pampas, because it was the only one that didn't sound mushy. But the music was pretty screechy. Dr. Zemer said slot machine music was one of the great advantages of the modern civilization, but I'm pretty sure he was kidding. It was dark by the time we got back on the road again, and lights were flashing past all the time, and before long I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I heard was Dr. Zemer's voice saying, "All right, Mike, back her up to the rear entrance." I sat up and looked out. We were right beside a big dark building. When the truck stopped, I got out and went around to the tailgate. "Hello there, Nate," Dr. Zemer said. "Welcome to Washington. I'm afraid we've kept you up very late." "Don't you worry about him, Doctor," Michael Finney said. "He's been sound asleep all the way from Wilmington." He opened the rear doors of the truck, and we let down the tailgate. Dr. Zemer pulled open a big door of the building and turned on a light so we could see what we were doing. The loading platform was just as high as the floor of the truck, so we didn't have to use a ramp. This was a lucky thing, because Uncle Beasley was too long to turn around in the truck, and it was a tough job just getting him to back up. Michael Finney sort of held up the tail to keep him pointed right, and the doctor and I took hold of his horns and pushed him backwards. I kept on talking to Uncle Beasley all the time so he wouldn't get excited or anything. He didn't want to budge at first, but he finally seemed to get the idea, and he backed out of the truck one step at a time. Then we swung him around and led him into the building. We went down a long corridor and almost ran down Dr. Kennedy, who came around a corner right in front of us. He gulped and squeezed back against the wall to let Uncle Beasley go by. "My Lord," Dr. Kennedy said, "he's as big as a horse. Isn't it dangerous to walk around with him that way? I don't like the looks of those horns." "Don't worry," Dr. Zemer said. "Nate knows how to handle him." We led the dinosaur into a good-sized room at the end of the hall. There was a lot of straw on the floor, and it had a window with bars in it, and a good strong gate across the doorway. "I got your grass finally," Dr. Kennedy said, pointing to a big pile of it in one corner. "It was an awful job. We had to send way out towards Gaithersburg to get it. It all came in fresh this morning, and there's half a ton of it there." "Good, fine," Dr. Zemer said. "I guess everything's all set here. Now I'll just speak to the night watchman about this, and then Nate, we'll go over to my apartment and tumble into bed." We said the good night to Dr. Kennedy and to Michael Finney, and then to Dr. Zemer. Dr. Zemer and I walked around the corner of the museum. He pointed out across the big open space. There was a big, tall, pointed pillar sticking straight up in the air, all white against the sky. It looked really beautiful. It was so clean and sharp looking. "That's the Washington Monument, Nate," Dr. Zemer said. Then he pointed in the opposite direction. "And there's the Capitol." I looked where he was pointing and saw a long building with a great big dome on it, and the whole building was all lit up with bright lights. It was one of the grandest looking buildings I ever saw. I don't think I'll ever forget that sight. "Come on, Nate," the doctor said, pulling my arm a little. "We've got to get some sleep. We'll have plenty of time to see the sights in the next few weeks."